This is the tier list for the hero selectors we'll be getting from the Epic Dash event. Both new players and veterans will be getting 4 hero selectors, and then for the fully deck selectors, new players get 6, while veterans get 4. So it's anywhere from 8 to 10 selectors, the fully decked ones being the ones that basically give you your unit completely maxed out, level 60, 6-star awaken, plus 15. So that might affect who you want to pick because you want to pretty much use those on units with higher Moligora costs. So I'll go a bit more in depth in a separate video later. And we should also quickly mention that Guard Captain Crow plus Robin will be unavailable from your selectors because they are too new. And then Asaria, Tamarin, Brieg, Sigrid, Surya, Vivian, Kana, and Yuna are all free units. So you probably do not want to take these from your selectors because you should already have them. And then one more thing we should talk about is that on 7/25, we should be having balance patch notes because there's a balance patch on August 7th that they mentioned in the Epic 7 World Cup at one point. So balance patch 2 weeks in advance. And this means that you could potentially use some of your selectors on the buffed units. So let's take a look at veterans first. All of our selectors come pretty late. There's only one deck selector in week 2 that comes pretty early. So this one you could drag into week 3 if you want. 7/25 is during week 3. You could wait until the last day to claim this and just drag it out into week 3. But we have a ton of selectors to work with. It's just if you start getting to some of the lower tier options and you don't really have anything you're really yearning for, you can wait and see if you want anything from the buffs. So by the time you get to week 4, 5, and 6, the buffs or the notes will be live, and then week 5 and week 6 you could even wait and see how the buffed units perform if you want. New player, it's pretty much the same idea. It's just the distribution of your selectors. You have a fully deck selector every single week, and then 1 normal selector in week 1, 2 in week 3, and 1 in week 5. So it's just worth keeping in mind that you have the option to potentially wait and see if anybody gets buffed first before you make your choices. So now we can take a look at the actual tier list. First up, I'll talk about Mort because Mort is a really, really good unit, but he is in the episode 3 selector. The only thing worth keeping in mind is that maybe you could pick Mort with the fully deck selector because he is a plus 15 unit, and then pick a different unit from the episode 3 selector. Other units in there, there's Paulus, who, if you want to build her DPS, she is plus 15. As a debuffer, she's only plus 8. But the besides those two, it's kind of just PvE units. It's like Cecilia or Euphine. So not really too many choices for you to work with there, unfortunately, but that is potentially an option to do with your Mort. Next up, there's Fene, who is just a PvE unit, but she is so absurdly good in PvE that she definitely deserves her spot here. She tears through Fire, Dark, Ice, and potentially Light Expedition. Light, she has some issues due to being sealed, but there are ways to work around it. And then she also can solo clear the Magnar boss on Perdition difficulty in Trial of the Constellation, so definitely deserving of her spot here at the top of S. There's also Genua, who's a really strong DPS, especially with ML Paladus, because his whole thing is once he drops below 50% HP, he gives himself the rage buff, which lets his S1 proc his S3, and ML Paladus can just give him the rage buff directly, so he doesn't need to really wait. His S2, besides giving him rage when he's below 50%, and the 50% CR push, also gives him Immortal when he hits 1 HP, so he has some decent survivability too. Just a really strong DPS. RTA, Guild War, both. Next up is Celine. Celine, she is mainly used just to counter units with non-attack skills. Anytime somebody procs a non-attack skill, with a cooldown of course on her S2, but she will activate her S2, which you can either set it to target the highest attack unit or have it be completely random depending on her EE. She will just slam into them, deal a ton of damage, and then get a bunch of CR push, and then she can use her S3 to deal a bunch of damage as well. So pretty solid counter into non-attack units. It just depends on what they're using because some units will have ways to deal with her S2, which is worth keeping in mind. Next up is Litica. A really, really strong opener. Her S2 reduces resources by 60%, decreases buff duration by 1 turn. It also inflicts restrict and bind, and then each unit that she hits will give her 25% CR. So she'll get 100% CR for hitting 4 units. And then her S3 is a pushback plus death break. That also gives everybody skill nullifier, and if she's hitting somebody with bind, it ignores F-res. So yeah, she does a lot of things. Really, really strong unit as an opener. Then, yeah. Next up is A tier, which is looking pretty bare. It's just the RGB units are kind of niche, I think. So there's Crow, who is a pretty solid mitigation tank. At this point, there's a lot of mitigation tanks that are better than him, but he is RGB, so he is more accessible. He has built-in Arius, which means that he just takes a portion of other units' damage, and he also gives defense buff to all allies, plus he has the classic horse on his S3 that deals damage based on his missing HP. So still a pretty solid tank option if you're lacking some of the better ones. Next up is Rwana. Rwana, her PvP usage is pretty niche. It's really just when people are picking specific units with spamming extra attacks, counter attacks, or dual attacks. Her S2 heals all allies for, I think it's like 5% or something, based on each unit hit. So it's mainly AoEs. If somebody's spamming single targets, her S2 won't be doing too much. But if somebody's spamming AoEs, then suddenly she is healing a lot more. And she also CR pushes. So mainly against that, one thing to note is that in the Trial of the Constellations, she is really good against the Queeness, the ice boss. So she's kind of mandatory for that boss, I think. But definitely worth getting for that, I would say, because she also has some niche usage in PvP as well. So that is it for the very small A tier. And then after that, I would say it starts getting pretty niche. Like at this point, what you're going to pick is really going to depend on what you want, and you might want to start seeing if any units get buffed. There's Politis, who is similar to Celine in the sense that she counters non-attack skills. It's just when somebody uses a non-attack skill, she'll activate her S2, which is just a AoE attack, and it also CR pushes her, so she could use her S3. The other thing about her S2 is that it reduces all CR pushes by 50%. Similar to Abyssal Euphene's S2, they both have that same CR reduction effect. And then her S3 is an AoE that inflicts buff block and blind. So she can be run as a debuffer with Abyssal Crown into certain units with non-attack skills if you really want. You'll just basically just have 2 AoEs and you can try to stun everything. Or if you're trying to cleave with her, it's kind of niche, but it depends on if you think her S2 passive is going to help negate certain counters. She's kind of the same unit she's always been, it just always depends on what units are being played in the meta at that time. Next up is Elvira. Elvira just blocks Fighting Spirit with her S3, or with her S2, which can be useful against certain units, like Abyssal Euphene or Successor Teo. Just sometimes you'll see these units, and you can just slam her in, and you'll block all of their Fighting Spirit. I mainly use her in Arena against sometimes Young Senya, and sometimes Abyssal Euphene, just into certain team compositions, where you can just block all of their Fighting Spirit and pretty much negate everything. I also very rarely use her in Guild War 2, but she is just one of those floodgate units that just completely negates an entire mechanic. Next up is Abigail. Abigail is very nice for Protect the Carry comps, mostly in just Guild War and Arena. She doesn't really have that much usage in RTA, it's too niche. But in Guild War Arena, since you know exactly what you're fighting, you can run her with other protection units, like Christie gives your backline F-res. Christie, Abigail, plus 1 unit in the back is pretty common, or just Abigail, plus 1 unit in the back. Because when the unit in the back drops to 1 HP, you will give them, which will cleanse all debuffs off of them, and then give them Immortality and Vampirism buff. So very useful for keeping a specific unit alive, especially if you're fighting a team with no strips, or if you just give the unit in the back a bunch of F-res via Christie or something, that Immortality won't be able to be stripped. So you can use her with stuff like ML Celine is one option, ML Ron, or the old team with BBK I still use sometimes. So pretty nice for Guild War Arena, I would say. Next up is Arya. Arya is pretty hard to build just because she wants a lot of stats. She's a defense scaling bruiser, so defense, HP, speed, crit chance, and crit damage, but she also wants Efrez because her entire gimmick is that she gives everybody stealth and barrier, and then she gives herself counter buff and defense buff. So if your counter buff gets stripped, you are useless. In Guild War, and I actually don't think she really gets used in Arena anymore, just because there is more in Harsetti everywhere, but she has some angles in Guild War. It's just be careful the higher up you go, because sometimes there are people running 300 effectiveness Arukas and you just get debuffed anyways. But you can run her into certain teams in Guild War sometimes. Like, some of these Aruka Emily defenses just do not have like the damage to kill her. You can just kind of slam her in and it generally works out okay. And for RTA, she's just really hard to gear because you need so many stats, you're going to be squishy, and you might just die, but she is usable. Next up is C tier. So there's Eligos, who isn't as strong as an Open anymore, but he is still usable as a single target DPS. So he's just kind of here as like a single target DPS option. His S3 notably gives him a bunch of hit chance and inflicts resource reduction. So you can use him into stuff like New Kid Added potentially. Next up is Schneel, who is supposed to be a DDR counter, but the problem is there are other units that are going to be on the field with you, so he doesn't always necessarily work very well into DDR, but if somebody picks DDR in a really bad spot, Schneel works okay there, and he gives everybody defense buff, so he does have some kind of utility at least. Next up is Knockwall, who is kind of just a mediocre Litica. Knockwall, she inflicts bind on everybody, and then her S2 can seal, but her S2 doesn't ignore Efrez. I think if she got an EE, that made her similar to Litica, where her S2 ignores Efrez. If she's hitting somebody with bind, then she would probably be a little bit better, but she's really, really inconsistent, and her win rate has reflected that for pretty much ever, because she just, sometimes you'll whiff your seal and it'll just get you killed. Next up is Alencia, who I think is, oh my god, I think she is mainly used with Young Senya, honestly. There are some situations when you're using Young Senya where you actually want Alencia over Mort, just because Alencia's defense buff lets you tank things better. By herself, I think she's kind of too niche to really be used that much, but she is decent with Young Senya. She's a solid bruiser, inflicts injury, S3 gives everybody defense buff, and also S1. You can soul burn it to ignore Efrez, she'll death break and do an extra hit. Really good injury bruiser if you're using Young Senya into certain teams. And then there is Elena. Elena is just a super, super niche healer slash cleanser. Somebody hits her with an AoE, she'll proc her S2, which CR pushes her up, and then her S3 gives everybody invincibility plus Efra's buff, and she's got cleansing on all of her skills. Her S1, S2, S3, it's all got cleanses. So she is a anti-AoE thing. Sometimes you can use her into certain AoE teams and just kind of pray that it works out. And then there is Destina, who isn't really anything special. She's just a healer with a revive on S3. Her revive isn't that good, I think, just because you'll revive, but your units are back at like 20% HP. So, and she doesn't CR push them or anything, so sometimes they'll just die again, but there aren't that many bulk healers out there, so you kind of just end up with Destina being one of the better ones. And then I'll first mention this tier, the speed imprint tier. This is just Vildred. He is the only 5-star speed imprint in the game. This is kind of not an option for any newer players, but if you are a cleaver and still missing your speed imprints, don't forget to grab Vildred if you really want the speed imprint. And then there is this PvE only tier, which there's other units here that I'll just mention by name. I won't put them on the list. But Charles is here because for Trial of the Constellations, Perdition difficulty, Charles is pretty much mandatory for Aquina, which I mentioned Rowana as well. But that is just because Charles is S3 gives him counter buff and 3 buffs, and the boss as a mechanic where you want to counter it a bunch. Plus the CR push that he gives from S2 works really well with the boss's mechanics. You can just spam Soulburn his S3, and it works out really, really well. The other thing is just he also lets you clear it at level 1 blessing, so you don't need to invest it all into the tree, so you can immediately do perdition. So that's really, really nice. It seems like Trial of the Constellation is going to reset the blessing tree each season. I'm not sure if they're doing it just for the beta season or if it's after every season. We'll see how it goes, but for now, he is really nice for the Trial of the Constellation. And then there is Bihu. So Bihu is a little bit worse than Charles, I would say, because for perdition difficulty, clearing at level 2 blessing, which is the minimum for Hooray, he is mandatory. However, once you hit level 3, your options open up a lot. So you have the option of just doing it on Nightmare, and then doing perdition after, and you could just fully skip using Bihu, potentially. But if you want to do it on level 2, then he is mandatory, so I'll mention him here. And then there is Charlotte. Charlotte gets mentioned here because if you don't have Robin, she's actually not used until RC21, but at RC21, Charlotte plus Carrot is the most consistent duo without Robin for one-shotting Rift. So that is why she gets mentioned here. It's just, she's also really cheap to build. You don't really need her plus 15, so you could use a normal Selector on her. But she does do very well into Rift at RC21. And also, if you do have Robin, Charlotte is potentially an option if you want faster runs for some reason. She is like 20 seconds faster. It depends on your setup, but 15 to 20 seconds faster. If you're doing Charlotte plus Robin duo versus a Robin solo, it could be a lot faster actually, because the fast Robin solo does need very good gear. But some other options that are here, but I didn't list. Fenris is really good against Ice and Light Expedition now. I don't think he's somebody you should pick unless you're completely out of options, but he is an option for PvE. There's also Cecilia, who I think is really nice. She's only really used against Earth Expedition right now, but you also use her in Hall of Trials sometimes. I think there's 2 bosses that she's good against, which is the Abyssal Euphine rotation and the Destiel Ray rotation. She's good against both of those. And her kit overall is just really good for PvE. If they ever decide to bring Advent back, she's pretty solid there as well. And then there's obviously a lot of other units that could be listed here in like the PvE tier, which I guess like if I had a second PvE tier, they'd be a little bit lower. And then maybe some like D tier PvP units, but these are generally the units. I think if you're looking at any of the other units, you already know what you're doing, and you probably don't really need me to tell you what to do. So this is the hero selector tier list. We have so many selectors. I think a lot of players, even newer players, just off of hitting units from all of the tickets you got, plus the free summons, you might end up full clearing this list, at which point you can take a look at what units you're still missing, asking in the Discord how useful any of them are, or just start looking at imprints for units or something. But that's it for this tier list, and I will see you guys next time.